optimism about the future of Canada. Who's with me? Right? Our next guests have redefined what it means to evolve as artists. With the success of their graphic novels, scripted dramas, and now as the subjects of the new documentary, Fanatical, the catfishing of Tegan and Sara. I know you guys are excited. This iconic duo has proven their versatility time and time again. For an exclusive conversation about what it takes to thrive in unfamiliar territory, please welcome musicians, authors, and filmmakers Tegan and Sara in conversation with writer and broadcaster Elamine Abdelmahmoud. A big round of applause. I know there are lots of fans in the audience.
I feel like I'm on Billions.
Wait, is that said derogatorily or is that still complimentary? Because I don't know if you know how that show ends and it's a bad time.
It's true. I think we were in more of an optimistic season, launching something really exciting.
They're the early parts of it, before everything gets much darker. Hi everybody, how you doing today? Well, let's see it. Tegan, Sara, I'm so delighted to be talking with you guys. But listen, I gotta start with the fact that in the last little while, there's been so many projects. I want to talk about the types of projects. We go from a book to the adaptation of a book into a TV show, into a graphic novel, to another one. These are a lot of modes to be working in. Does that come naturally to you? Because let's not forget, in the middle of all this, you guys have 2 albums, just throughout all of those processes. So does that come naturally to you?
We've taken to say that we're probably maybe a little bit unwell. There's definitely a compulsiveness to the way we work, which we do laugh about, but also I'm definitely unpacking therapy weekly right now. I think some of it probably comes from the way we were raised. You know, we were like kind of blue collar Northeast Calgary kids, and when we chose not to go to university, our parents were like, "We worked so hard, like why wouldn't you do this more traditional thing?" And so I think we always had this compulsion to be successful, or at least show that we were working hard and that we were on the right path in music. And I think as we hit our 30s and now our 40s, we don't want to tour as much, and so the diversification of our world was just a necessary thing to feed that monster inside of us that wants to constantly be producing work, but not have to leave home. So it's a big thing, but I think that probably the fuel for it is probably just anxiety and then a little bit of creativity.
I'm so glad you're anxious. No, in a beautiful sense though, like the idea that there's some kind of thing that is missing, and you're like, well, the answer to that is work. The answer to that is like create more and more work. Does that feel like a productive tension, or does that feel like actually like, maybe I should unpack this more in therapy? What's your feeling?
I mean, for myself, the pandemic and then having a child 2 years ago, those two sort of like giant events have really slowed me down and have made me focus, I think, on different areas of my life that maybe aren't always creative or connected to work. And I mean, there's definitely, I definitely am contemplating like, okay, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a healthy thing? But you know, I think as long as, this is gonna sound really, I feel very lucky that this is what's been motivating me through most of my life since adolescence, but I just want to feel good when I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing, even if it's hard, even if there's sacrifice required. I just like, if I can get really invested in something and like get into a flow, whether that's making an album or writing a book or just hanging out at a park with my kid, like I feel like that's always what I'm striving for. It's not necessarily, I don't necessarily think of it now just about like ambition or about whatever. I just think like, oh, I just really like to be invested in what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Right now, the thing that you're invested in doing is bringing a lot of adolescent pain to the forefront.
Yeah.
And that's not something. I mean, let's talk about this because Crush more specifically just came out this week. I realized that people who are my people are like the people who can recall with terrifying accuracy what it felt like to be an adolescent, to sort of experience that thing. I feel that way all the time, and I think people are functional. I'm like, how are you not thinking about what it was like when you were a child and something of the earth? And so luckily, I get introduced to your work, and then in your work, we're like, no, We remember it very well. Talk to me about the desire to mine that pain regularly, because I don't think that comes naturally to most people.
I mean, I think two things. One, Sarah and I are so lucky that we're still friends with a lot of the people we went to school with, and I think they were all unbelievably brilliant and inspiring in their own right, and so revisiting that time and getting to explore the relationships we had with them, I think these were relationships that really shaped who we became as people, and I think half the reason we're sitting on this stage and having the career we have is because we did have this incredible luck of meeting really inspiring, really unusual people in our youth. So writing about them was a pleasure, it was exciting, but then the other side of it, of course, is mining the hurt and the pain and the suffering and all that stuff that you feel when you're an adolescent. I think for Sarah and I, we find a lot of catharsis in revisiting that time and reprocessing it through an adult lens. Also, as young people, we didn't really have a lot of role models. As queer women, as musicians, there just wasn't a lot for us to compare ourselves to, and so I think there's a motivation under the surface to tell our stories so that the young next generation can look at that and see themselves, hopefully, reflected.
Sarah, what do you think?
You know, it's funny, I would also add that there's stuff that we are talking about and reframing in adulthood that happened to us when we were younger that is definitely fraught, you know, whatever. But one of the things that I think makes it worthwhile is that a lot of the relationships we write about, whether it's with our bodies, with each other, with our family, with our friends, those are relationships that we still have today. So I think the work is necessary to continue to grow and to strengthen those connections. There's plenty that I do not write about or think about that I have left, you know, in the margin of my mind or whatever, because it's not. And maybe actually there's something there to investigate later. There was definitely stuff though that when people talk about their adolescence being traumatizing, I feel that way too. But I don't feel traumatized by the things I'm writing about. Those are relationships that, you know, that may be complicated or difficult, but they're relationships worth exploring, I think.
Is it a matter of literally saying, you know what, some things don't belong to public, some things do belong to.
And sometimes you meet people who, there was very specifically actually in our memoir, and just for the record, the graphic novels are really sweet. There's nothing terrifying about any of it. I mean, unless you consider menstruating terrifying, which I still do. But you know, for the sake of the people, we wrote about it. But there was a moment when we were working on our memoir, and I had there was an anecdote, a story that I had included in the book, and I remember one of our editors, as an aside, wrote to me and said, unless you want to dig deeper into this story and talk about it more, I don't think it belongs in this book. And I had sort of off the cuff mentioned it. It was actually a story that involved a sexual encounter with a guy that I'd had in between middle school and high school, and she was like, it's brave to talk about these types of things, but how much do you really want to reveal about this? Because it feels like a little thrown in. And I remember thinking wow, yeah, that's true. If I had to explore it even one sentence further, I think I wouldn't have wanted to. And so it was a really easy thing to take out. And that was part of our learning process was sometimes we can be very surface and topical, and it can seem more like entertainment, but when you really want to get into a story or a feeling, that's kind of where the work happens. And I didn't always know exactly what to include or not to include.
I think that the thing this is getting at is kind of important because there's something about creating work and putting it out there in the world that at least telegraphs to certain people that you're an expert in navigating and moving through this thing. And we're going to get to the documentary in just a moment, but there's something about the relationship with fans where they go, we trust you with this topic, we trust you with this kind of conversation. How do you navigate, the pressure to sort of say, I'm not an expert in this is just the way that I went through this. Maybe you want to
Well, I think when we started writing, we'd already been playing music professionally 20 years, so I think we had navigated that relationship with our audience for quite a lot of time, so we understood how much our audience needed from us to make it feel personal, but we also have been able to define what was ours and what we should keep for ourselves. I think Sarah and I are really excellent at curating a version of ourselves for the public that feels really personal, but still allows us to keep quite a bit of real estate for ourselves. And we've been really delicate and I think mostly ethical when it comes to how we talk about our friends and family and relationships in the public. So when we kind of got into writing, that was a negotiation we had to make, where it feels really different when you're singing lyrics and then when you're sitting down and writing a story down on the page. You know, I always use the example of my mom read high school our memoir. She was so upset, like very, very upset. And partly, it wasn't that there was anything specific in the book she could point to that upset her. It was the in between the lines stuff, you know, the memories that she had that flooded back. It felt for her that was in the book. And we had to sort of negotiate that with her, where it was like, that's not in the book, like your perception of the book is different because you lived it. But it didn't matter how much we negotiated. I walked away from that experience and thought we need to be much more thoughtful when we're telling our stories publicly in this format. I think with music, there's a bit more opaqueness or mystery to it, whereas with books, for the people who love us or have known us, it's all right there. And I think we're still figuring out that equation, like how not to reveal too much while still really saying, this is what I experienced. So it's not quite saying I'm not an expert in this, but it's also saying, this is just my experience. Like someone taught me when you're writing a memoir, it's a memoir. Like it's my vantage point. I thought that was really funny because there was so many times where I was trying to insert emotion or feeling into other people, and our editors were amazing at being like, no.
Yeah.
So we're definitely learning still that.
It's also so complicated because so many of my favorite writers, I was just going to say real writers.
That's you.
I'm an
You're 3 books in this
no,
one.
but so many writers that I really admire
are so candid about the fact that when they're writing, the exact thing we're talking about, this sort of thinking about other people's feelings and protecting people, that can't be in your mind. That to write and to really disappear into these stories and these characters that, I don't know, it's like a disservice to the material to be too consumed with what Tegan said, which is sort of like curating this identity. So I'm always in conflict with that, both in music and in writing. I want to write the way that I did when I was 15 years old again, you know, where I didn't have to think about being on stage with a Britney Spears microphone talking about it. I want to say the thing, like, I really want to get to the heart of the matter and say things that make me uncomfortable. And if I'm uncomfortable, then I know that it's going to be compelling for whoever is in the room listening to what I'm saying and what I'm doing. But our job, and just being an adult and being, as Tegan said, sort of ethical and mindful of the people around us, has been sort of chipping away at that need to make the most honest thing. It's sort of like, well, is it really worth it to be honest if it makes your mom really mad at you? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, there's a romance I think that people have with the notion of the writer as the person who's going to say the thing at any cost.
Yeah.
But also, I've also seen the flip side of that, and I've sort of maybe experienced it as not fearlessness, but sometimes kind of carelessness. Right?
Sure,
Carelessness with like with the emotions of people who are in the book, who are sort of adjacent to the stories in the book. And I think like you can be a writer and you can be as truthful as you need to be, but also you do have some duty of care to the people in your life, right? Like,
I mean, we certainly subscribe to that. I mean, I think we are prime example of people who subscribe to that. But then I'm also somebody who consumes media all across the board, writing, TV, film, whatever, that probably is made without any of that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's made in mind, but it's not. I don't know. I'm thinking right now for some reason of like Gerard Carmichael's most recent show on HBO.
I said cringe and you mentioned it.
It's so good. It's so compelling and provocative and uncomfortable, and I feel in awe of his ability to. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Make people that uncomfortable.
Yeah, and potentially like it feels. It almost feels like he's abusing himself, you know, by doing this for all of us, and yet it's so incredible to watch, and I feel like it really stayed with me. And so, I mean, I've sort of always lived in in sort of admiration of those types of artists, because I think maybe that kind of artist lives inside of me too, but you know.
Yeah, I think that's a tough balance to navigate. I mean, like, I think about it with Dark Carmichael specifically as a frame, a conversation you had with Tyler, the creator, the very first episode.
Oh my God.
Like, it's, we watch that and that's really fearless, but their relationship is never going to be the same.
Yeah.
Like, there's a cost to being that truthful. Yeah, I don't know if like that's a cost that every artist is willing to pay, right? But that's.
Well, there's a whole other level to it where I'm like, was it a cost? Like, how much did they actually talk about it? And how much, you know, I think that's what's so interesting about art is that, I mean, having just made a documentary this past couple of years, I have a very different understanding and definition of what documentary means now that I've been through the process. Because a documentary is not necessarily a historical record, it's still the perspective of the filmmaker. It's, you know, it's still
Quite shaped.
yeah, and so I think even that show, in that scene specifically you're talking about, I'm like, everyone's feeding off that moment, you know, and I think that's really interesting. I mean, that's where I think Sarah and I have lucked out, is that we have this built-in collaborator, and we're always feeding off of each other. So much of the Tegan and Sara experience for a lot of our fans is seeing that banter and that interaction between us. And a lot of people wondered how we were going to take that from music and live performance onto the page.
Yeah.
And I think we've managed to do that. There's still an enormous amount of collaboration and rising to the occasion and friction. You know, when we wrote our memoir, there were many stories and we had different versions of what happened. And there's a lot of moments of conflict and friction in the book where we tell different versions of the story, and our editors were amazing because they were like, lean into that. We were two separate people. Though many people don't realize that about twins, we do have our own functioning brains, and like, you know, we experience things differently. And I think we've always lived under the umbrella of Tegan and Sara, everything we've done publicly. It was really exciting to put something out that was in conflict with the other.
Okay, so you mentioned the documentary, and I want to talk now about the documentary. You had this, you had a reader TIFF recently. It's called Fanatical, the Catfishing of Tegan and Sara, and it's like this close look at fandom related to social media. Let's just take a look at the trailer.
I loved being in a band with my twin sister. We started making music in the late 90s, and by the mid-2000s, we were playing Coachella with DJ Leno, Letterman.
Tegan and Sara, incredibly good at building community through versioning social media.
Being a fan of Tegan and Sara was code for I'm queer. I felt absolutely our responsibility to take care of them. I was very personable with everybody.
Tegan and Sara were known as being very accessible.
We messaged Tegan and we got a response. I was very excited.
Tegan added me as a friend on Facebook. I had become friends with Tegan and it had become a long-term friendship. At some point, she sent me a shared drive and a password. It felt off. So I reached out to her management and got a text that said she has no idea who you are. And I said, well, then Tegan has a big problem.
In the beginning, we thought it was just a leak of a demo, and then we realized this hacker had access to Tegan and Sara's personal information.
This whole new, really scary universe opened up.
Fake Tegan knew where we all lived. Email addresses had been hacked. They shared passport scans and knew their mom's medical history.
It introduced the idea that it's someone we know going after our friends. Me and my girlfriend. That just made me question everyone around me. It was terrifying and scary. I was paranoid.
The fear, of course, was the sort of physical safety.
It got darker when we realized multiple fans had been catfished online and thought that they were talking to me.
People came forward from all over the world saying they had been corresponding with Tegan for years.
It escalated to a relationship? Yeah.
Felt more sexual.
Felt very weak and definitely left a mark on me. It turned my life upside down.
We were extremely worried about fans talking to this person.
Then we got information that shook us again, and our worlds exploded.
We started to understand how little we really knew. Fake Tegan systematically destroyed my life. We kept this story a secret for a long time.
Yeah. I watched the first half out of that documentary and I've seen all that half. I want to ask you about a lot of things that went on in this documentary. First, I got to say, like, I it's like this would reset your entire relationship to privacy, your entire relationship to you just being a public person. And yet you both sort of remain so giving, so willing to sort of make yourself available, to put yourselves out there. So I just wanted to ask, how do you protect your own private internal space? You know, how do you make the thing that needs to remain private? How do you manage that?
I think part of it is the generation Sarah and I are from. Like, we didn't start our career with social media. We didn't have social media in high school, so I don't think that we have that compulsive or day-to-day relationship to social media in the same way that a lot of younger artists, you know, our peers in the industry do. So we've had, even before fake Tegan, Sara was already like, I think Facebook is suspicious. I don't know if I should do that. You know, like, there was already a healthy amount of resistance to oversharing anything that wasn't about us specifically. So we don't post about our partners. We don't post photos of ourselves having brunch with our friends. Like, as hard as people, our partners in the industry, try to get us to go on TikTok and like do our makeup routine or show you how we make penne, like we're not gonna do it. We're sort of kind of joking about it.
I kind of want that now.
Yeah, I was gonna say it. I'm like, I'm pretty good at making awesome. But, so I think we always had a really healthy relationship to it, but certainly in 2011 when the fake Tegan stuff came to our world, we closed up shop pretty quickly, which was jarring for everyone that we were friends with, but specifically for our audience, because we had been pretty open, we've been pretty friendly and reachable, but I'm also doing press for this film. I've also started to be a little more honest. Like, that's a pretty media scrubbed answer. Like, the honest truth is that right from the beginning of our career, we were a little bit afraid of fans.
Yeah. I love that.
You know, when people approach you and they're like, I love you, and they're shaking and they're nervous and they have a tattoo of your face on their body, like, on one hand, yes, it's like, I'm so grateful for you. And on the other hand, you're like, get away from me.
I would like to also just say that
In a kind way, like, you're like, please don't kidnap me and make me live in your basement. Like, I don't want to. Can you enjoy me from a distance? Like, I don't mean it in a mean way, I mean it to be funny, but.
It's not mean to say it's weird for you to have a face tattoo.
Yeah, mostly I'm worried about how that's gonna age. If we're dead. If we're dead and you didn't kill us, you can get a tattoo of our face. That's maybe that's but I know a lot of Jimi Hendrix tattoos on normal people's arms, so I think that's okay.
I was gonna say too, like I think one of the things that's really interesting that I'm considering more and more, and I've been thinking about this a lot because of Chaperone and her sort of initial reaction to this, like, just absolutely casual, like, just like, I mean, I don't even know, she's not in the same, I don't even think we're like the same species. She's so famous, right?
Last year she played the opera.
It's,
That's
yeah, like,
1,000%.
we do not know, we don't have the experience that she's had, but I find it interesting to think about her experience. And one of the things that I talk a lot about, Tegan and I as twins, identical twins, we've been famous since we were born. Like, and by famous I just mean we've had people, strangers, coming up to us since we were little babies, talking to us, touching us, looking at us, asking us questions. And the reason why I say this is that by the time that we were 17, 18 years old and people were coming up to us and saying, are you those twins that are in the band? The feeling was familiar to me. I wasn't like, holy shit, this is so weird and cool. I was like, this feels exactly like when people would come up to us at the mall or would talk to us at an airport, you know, at TSA or whatever. Like, this is, it's the same familiar. It is being recognized by people you do not know for something that is not always entirely in your control. And I think that that suspicion Tegan's talking about, or that sort of like natural instinct to protect ourselves was always there, because when we were 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years old, you know, Tegan and I wouldn't want to go into the bank with my mom. We didn't like to walk through. My mom and dad would separate us at the mall and make us walk through the mall separately because people would just surround us and overwhelm us.
Yeah.
Seriously, like, it sounds so silly, but I think that our initial reaction to fandom and celebrity was another layer of how do I protect myself? How do I enjoy this? And while respecting this dynamic and this kind of relationship that is important, if you want to be in a band and you want to be successful, you need fans and you want to like them and trust them and love them, but you also sort of have to have boundaries. And I think that stuff was already really kind of built in for us because of being twins. And I think that that sort of dynamic that we talk about in the film and that people are talking about so much culturally right now, where things get a little deranged or a little twisted. It's such a small number of people, but it's unbelievable what a huge impact it can have on you. Think about if you've been scammed recently, like maybe you got convinced to let someone take over your laptop because they said they were calling from a bank, or whatever it is. It happens every day. Scams are happening all the time. You only have to have that happen to you once, and you're never going to be like, this is definitely someone from the bank that wants me to let them control my laptop. Like, you're never going to make that mistake. It only took one person in our career, and that was before feeding, for me to feel afraid of everyone. It only took one person doing something that scared me, that made me feel like I can't assume that everyone is good. I have to sort of assume, not that everyone's bad, but that I have to be very careful.
You have to apply some care.
Absolutely, 100%. And so, I think there's something about this film that is so relatable right now, because it's not something as nuanced as it was when it first started happening to me and Tegan. It's something that's kind of happening to everybody now on some level.
I'm interested in the fact that you guys brought up Chaperone, because I do think that there's a parallel here, because the way that Chapel's navigating this is publicly drawing those boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? And no one should ever have to do that. That's an impossible thing to do. The idea that drawing those boundaries in real time in public while we watch you do that and say that this is allowed to stay in, this can't, this guy's got to stay out. But then, and you're making these things, you're revisiting a period of time when suddenly everyone around you, you're like, I don't know if I trust anyone near me that closely. I feel like it's an interesting parallel to me, because having navigated that privately and having a bit of distance from it must be an entirely different experience than the idea of having to do it in real time, publicly. Like, you kind of feel settled now? You kind of feel settled in the boundaries that you've drawn?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, that fame and celebrity is a really unnatural state. And there are some people who are famous their entire lifetime, but it's pretty cyclical for everybody else, whether it's for 15 minutes of fame or you're well known for decades. The sort of peak of fame, like that fiery, stratospheric, you're known everywhere moment, it's a very, just such a small percentage of the population will ever go through it. I can't possibly even project what that must feel like, but I can say that all of the time in our life where we've been more popular, where there was a period of time between 2012 and 2015 where, we played the Oscars, we were on tour with Katy Perry, Taylor Swift had had stuff on stage. We were being recognized everywhere. We were on Glee, our song was on the radio.
Yeah.
That wasn't a happy time for me, I was enjoying it at some level. I was really thrilled and so grateful, so humble that at that point in our career, we were women in our mid-30s having a moment in pop music was pretty unheard of. But it's an unnatural state to be watched, to be criticized, to deal with that many human beings looking at you and sharing their opinion of you. It really affects the way you see yourself. It affects how you see the world. It certainly affects our relationship to each other, to our fans, to our career. Everything we've done since that moment in time has been a reaction to that time, including making this documentary, including writing books. It was all a reaction to that time that felt completely out of control, and we felt very under a magnifying glass. So I will say that I do believe we've become very comfortable with our boundaries, but that is it's a moving, living thing at all times, because if I could time travel from 2012 to right now, 2012 me wouldn't even understand or comprehend how much social media we have to do, or how much of ourselves we have to share. And the teenager that started this band would not be able to understand it either. So I think we're constantly having to move that boundary. Always, all of us, and this isn't just a famous person thing, all of you in here are negotiating in terms of what you're comfortable sharing with the public all the time. And I think that that's what this film for me has ended up becoming about, is asking those big questions about who are we, what are these parasocial relationships we have with strangers that we don't know, and then what does that do when we look in the mirror at ourselves? What is our value when we're always constantly holding ourselves up against people we'll never meet, we don't know? It's just another documentary.
I love that way gave us this gigantic clock right here.
You know, it's time for us to get out of here.
He has run out of time. Someone's going to play us out in this moment. But I just want to say before they do so, I think the documentary does a really beautiful job of giving us the start of a public language. You know, it's going to be practice of the shared public language to talk about all of this. And the documentary is magical. Crush. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank
Tegan and
you.
Sara.